start. Yeah, that was the other thing. We will be recording this session. So anyone who can't join will be able to view this back, or anyone obviously who's on this would like to view it back. So we'll be sending links out on that. And as well, I should mention, we will be doing some sort of fact sheet of each organisation on these workshops, so that can be sent out far and wide from this. So yeah, we'll be collating information on that and sending that out. So there will be, the key information that you may want on those fact sheets. Right, Joshua from Welsh Government, I think you want to do a quick introduction on this bit, and then we'll go on to Frank from GLAA.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mia. And hello to everyone who's attending today's workshop. So yeah, just very briefly, my name is Josh Ugler. I'm the head of modern slavery and workers' rights for Welsh Government, and really pleased to be working with Food Skills Cymru and other partners on these workshops. So as set out on the screen, there are 4 goals for this workshop. Firstly, for attendees to have increased knowledge and understanding of workers' rights and the enforcement of these rights and their responsibilities as employers. Secondly, knowing where to get help, information, and guidance. Thirdly, knowing how to identify the signs of labour exploitation and where to report your concerns. And then finally, increasing knowledge about labour exploitation and unethical employment practices in supply chains. And then I'll pass back to Mia to pass to Frank. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Joshua. Frank, I believe you're up first for us, so I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Mia, and good morning, everyone. I'm Frank Hanson. I'm Head of Prevention and Partnerships at the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about our organisation, just to give you a bit of background, and then I'll go into the main body of the presentation, which will include a recent case study. So next slide, please, Mia. So that's our organisational aim. It's very clear that we work in partnership to protect vulnerable and exploited workers. Next slide, please, Mia. So we are what's termed a non-departmental public body. We're sponsored by the Home Office. Our headquarters are in Nottingham, and we have around 120 employees. So we're not a huge organisation, even though our remit does cover the whole of the UK. 75% of our workforce is actually operational, and they are deployed around the UK. So our head office in Nottingham contains our business support and corporate services, but the majority of our workers live and work, I say, in designated areas all around the four countries. So we have 3 primary functions. If you can go to the next slide, please, Mia. So firstly, we are a regulator, and we operate a licensing scheme that regulates businesses who provide workers into the fresh produce supply chain. So that's agriculture, horticulture, associated food and packaging industries, and the harvesting of shellfish. And really that the regulation is to ensure that employers, labour providers, meet the employment standards by law. It is the basis of our organisation. We were formed as a regulator, and we see it as our biggest prevention tool of labour exploitation. We have currently around 1,000 licence holders, and anybody supplying workers into the UK regulated sector, regardless of where they're based, needs to hold a GLAA licence. We also have an enforcement function, and we investigate reports of work exploitation and illegal activity, such as human trafficking, forced labour, and illegal labour provision. We work with a range of partners, such as the police, the National Crime Agency, and other government law enforcement agencies across the UK. Our third function is prevention, and that is our prevention work really is made possible by our partnerships We look to raise awareness and education of employment rights, working with businesses, particularly those operating in sectors that we know at high risk of exploitation. We also work with a whole range of the third sector, community groups, faith groups, and NGOs. And we look to design and implement interventions that prevent exploitation, or we can show it reduces the threat of exploitation or harm, both to workers, but also to communities and businesses. We have recently launched in England and Wales a national qualification, which focuses on worker rights and labour exploitation. And we really see this as a key part of our strategy to enable and empower vulnerable workers with the tools, the knowledge and understanding they need to prevent exploitation taking place either with themselves or with within their communities. So you might be wondering what all this has got to do with you. Well, unfortunately, despite being made illegal in Britain back in 1834, modern slavery still exists today. It exists in our workplaces, it also exists in our communities, and it affects men, women, and children of all backgrounds. So if we can go on to the next slide, please, Mia. What I want to do is jump straight into a recent case study, which some of you may already be familiar with, which took place here in Wales. The case is concerned with the forced labour and exploitation of a 24-year-old Latvian national by these three people: Norman Freiberg, Yakos Stankovečius, and his wife, Ruta Stankovečian. And that was contrary to Section 1 and 2 of the Modern Slavery Act. To give you a bit of background, our survivor, which I'll refer to in this presentation, he spoke little English, but he began to converse with Freiberg, who actually offered him the opportunity to come and work in the UK. Made it sound very attractive, and he said he would also provide him with accommodation at just £15 per week. So our survivor came to the UK, and on his arrival in Newport, he was met by Freiberg, who took him to the home of Yakos Stankovečius and his wife, Ruta. And over the preceding months, Freiberg's arranged for his national insurance number and also got him registered for work. At this point, Freiberg is telling our survivor that his debts are mounting, and this includes for his board and lodgings and his arrangements being made to get him into work, and also payment of a fee for obtaining his national insurance number. This basically is debt bondage that Freiberg is now operating, and he's looking to really make that debt unpayable. But our survivor believes by getting work, he'll soon be able to pay that debt off. But as you'll see later on in the presentation, that was never going to be the case. So our survivor started work at Avara Foods in Abergavenny in 2017. His wages were paid into one of two UPay accounts. However, our survivor was never aware of how much he earned, as he wasn't able to actually access and view the accounts, as they were all sent electronically, and he didn't have the means to access them. He was also given train tickets to get to work, or if another alternative, he was driven by Yakos Stankovečius, again for a very large cost. And all of this was added to his perceived debt. During this period, Norman Freiberg also took our survivor into the town centre, where he got him to open up into a contract for broadband, open several bank accounts, all of which were addressed to Freiberg's address, not to the place where our survivor was actually living. And then for that period, our survivor was going into work, and already the signs were becoming apparent. Whilst in work, our survivor was perhaps being smelly, being unkempt, being solitary, often being seen drinking or eating nothing, just drinking water. Sometimes food was brought to him. And what was happening is basically the three people that you can see there were plundering his wages. He received no more than £20 per week from his salary. The rest of it was, as I say, drawn out instantly from the accounts, and he got to see none of this. He was kept in appalling conditions in the house, and it's estimated that over 11-month period, up to £10,000 went out of his account, as I say, to these three people shown. He was also stripped of his bank passport, his bank cards, denied showers and clean clothes. He was also threatened. His family was threatened that if he didn't comply, that they would attack them back in his native Latvia. So the situation basically changed when our survivor was offered a permanent contract of employment, and it was at that point he disclosed to his supervisor about his debts, and his supervisor, to their credit, immediately contacted, well, it sought to clarify the conditions, but then immediately contacted the GLAA, and that is where the investigation began. When he was first spoken by the GLAA, our survivor was scared, and he also referred to his exploiters as friends, which does often happen. This fear or this belief of obligation, because he was brought over and given work and accommodation, and not least forgetting just how appalling that accommodation and his life was, he still felt a sense of or belief that these three people were in fact his friends. So Norman Friberg was arrested on suspicion of modern slavery offences. He was interviewed and denied any wrongdoing. Yakos Stankovekios and his wife Ruta were also arrested. They too denied any wrongdoing. But during the investigation and at the end of the investigation and the trial, Friberg was found guilty of requiring a person to perform forced and compulsory labour and arranging or facilitating the travel of another person with a view to exploitation, and he was jailed for 5 years. Yakos Stankovekios was convicted of the same forced and compulsory labour offence and was given a 4-year jail term, and his wife Ruta received a 20-month prison sentence, suspended for 18 months. She was also put under curfew until June 2023. I'm pleased to say our survivor is now making a long journey towards recovery, but he is getting the support that he needs and he deserves. He has a new job. He is now embarking on a new college course, having learned a good level of English, and he has saved enough money to visit his family in Latvia for the first time since arriving in the UK. And he now lives independently, albeit with the support and friendship that, as I say, he needs and deserves. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Mia. So we can and will take learning from this and other investigations to see how we can prevent or at least reduce and mitigate the threat of this happening again. And we look at a range of ways in which we can intervene. I've mentioned our licensing system, which again is our biggest prevention tool in terms of how we can regulate the supply of workers and follow up with enforcement activity if required. We do a lot of raising awareness, such as sessions as this morning, promoting the rights and really getting workers to understand what is decent work and also the signs of what is not decent work and what is abuse and labour exploitation. We work closely with businesses. Businesses can do an awful amount of due diligence within their supply chains to making sure that those areas where it can become quite a bit foggy about where ownership and welfare of workers but where they do that due diligence, they can certainly identify risks early on and preventing these kinds of incidents from occurring. We're also very keen on consumer change. Consumers have a huge influence on businesses by challenging the way in which services, goods are produced, and to ensure that no workers have been abused or exploited in the delivery of those services and goods. And quite rightly at the boardroom level as well, where we want to see that drive that policy change, that behaviour change, go right through organisations, and that does start right at the top with the boardroom. So next slide, please. So for all of us, whatever role we have, we need to know the signs of forced and compulsory labour and what to do should we suspect it is happening. There are a number of indicators of labour exploitation, and we're going to have a look at some examples. I will go through this quite quickly, but please bear in mind we've got leaflets on this, so there's no need to write down. And as Mia said at the start, it is being recorded. But these examples are grouped under 6 headings, and together they should allow you to build up a picture about a potential victim's appearance, behaviour, working and living conditions. And if it doesn't feel right, then we'll move on about how we can report it and support you with managing those concerns. But really important before we carry on, that not all of these indicators will apply in every case, but if they do apply, then it is important to seek assistance straight away. So next slide, please. So first of all, just starting off with the appearance, victims of labour exploitation, as you have seen in that case study, may wear inappropriate clothing, may wear clothes each day, so their appearance will become unkempt. They may not be provided with the proper clothing or proper safety equipment for the job that they're undertaking. They may suffer and be subjected to injuries, which could be the result of assault or measures to constrain their movements and behaviours. And those injuries can sometimes look old and untreated. So again, just looking for those signs. Next slides, please. So just moving on to restricted freedom, you may find, apologies, you may find victims are unable to communicate or move freely, have limited contact with their family, friends, or people outside their work environment. They may show a complete dependence on their employer for their work, for their travel, for their accommodation, and not be in possession or know where their key documents are, such as their passports, identity documents, and also have little or no access to medical care. Next slide, please. So working conditions, victims may often be unable to choose when or where they work. They may work excessively long hours, having no time off or not appearing to be able to challenge those working hours. They will often be solitary, again, as you saw in the case study, not interacting with work colleagues or being given no work contract of any kind. Next slide, please. Again, we saw victims will have little or no access to their wages, being paid very little or not at all, may not have in possession their bank cards. They'll often be punished through fines or disciplined, and often that is to increase or to maintain that perceived debt that I mentioned, and which was what our survivor was subjected to, or being charged excessively for services either that they don't want or need, or is completely out of all proportion. And often they are then told they can repay those debts once they've found work. Next slide, please. accommodation, and this is where exploitation moves away from the workplace and into the community. Victims may not even know where they're living. We've had victims that don't know not just their address, but they don't even know what town they've been living in. The accommodation will often be poor, substandard, really unfit for human habitation, and they will have no choice, not just over where they live, but who they live with, because often these houses, accommodation are severely overcrowded. In every room, 3 to 4 per room, living on and sleeping on mattresses. Next slide, please. So again, the behaviour, likely to be unfamiliar with their local language, may not be able to speak English, often acting and act as if they were instructed by someone else. People pretending to be their friends, pretending to be their family members, but really overseeing every decision, every movement that they make, and not allowing them to speak, or the victim may look towards that person almost for approval to speak, and having that limited and no social interaction, and will be highly mindful and distrustful of authorities. So, as I said, really important to remember that not all of these indicators will apply in every case, but if they do, they give you those concerns, then please obviously seek assistance with contacting the relevant authorities without delay. So just moving on, next slide, please. Yeah, just like that message. So we can move on to the next slide. So you've got there a range of different contact numbers, including the Modern Slavery Helpline, and always, if there's an emergency, threat of harm, either to yourself or to your victims, then always call 999 and ask for the police. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to quickly run through some resources that we've got. We did this workers checklist in partnership with the poultry industry. This is a poster that organisations can display in their workplace. As you can see, the codes that you can link to and jump to, which gives you more information. These are available in 5 different languages, and you can find them on our website. Next slide, please. We also have a range of posters, again, in different languages that you can access of our website. If you'd like copies, then do please get in touch and we can arrange for those to be sent out to you, particularly if you're thinking of running a campaign. You can really just give what your requirements are and we'll do our very best to support that campaign. And we'd be keen to find out how it went as well. Next slide, please. So this is our worker rights leaflet, and this is our most popular leaflet because, as you can see, it comes in a pocket size design, opens up, and you've got this range of information, contact signs, contact details, spotting the signs, and employment rights. And we have this, I think, in 20 different languages. So again, this is all available on our website. Next slide, please. So this is our contact details. We do have a confidential helpline. We have an email address, and there's also that report sheet you can complete on our website as well. And we really are looking for that information, and we are currently developing some additional resources that we want to make available to really give you the confidence and knowledge to report in information, because that information turns into intelligence for us if it's the right information and of the right quality. So yeah, next slide, please. Oh, there we are. Just as a quick postscript to I forgot to mention Norman Freiberg, who was convicted and given the 5-year jail sentence. Last Friday, he was served with a 10-year slavery and trafficking prevention order, which means that on his release, he has to abide by 6 conditions, which restrict what he can and can't do. And that will be placed, as I say, for 10 years, and breach of that is a criminal offence and can result in a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. There is a question in the chat that's for yourself, so happy for you to answer in the chat so we can all view it there, or obviously we can come back to it at the end, but yeah, I'll leave you to have a look at that. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions? Obviously, everyone, you can pop them in the chat. Right, next we have Louise from ACAS.
Thank you.
Diolch, Louise. I'll pass over to you.
Okay, bore da, good morning. Thank you for inviting me along to talk to you today. So what I'm going to cover today, if you want to go to the next slide, Mia. I'm just going to introduce you to ACAS. Sometimes I will speak to people and they will be very familiar with ACAS because of personal experience, or perhaps they've used our training or our resources. And then other times people will think that we are a union, which we are not. So I'm just going to talk to you a bit about who we are, what we offer, and how we might be able to help either now or in the future. And then I will touch on some key themes such as written statements, working hours and pay, and then absence, sickness and holidays. So as I always say with employment law, you know, it's a minefield, there is lots to cover. So this is really just to signpost you, go through some key points that you might want to, you know, consider looking into in more detail. Okay, so who we are. So just to introduce myself, so I am a senior advisor with ACAS and I am based up in North Wales. So I cover the region all the way over sort of from Wrexham to Anglesey and then down to Mid Wales. And I work with various organisations, all different sectors within that geographical patch. And then we also have senior advisors based in other locations in Wales. So depending on where you are, you will have access to a senior advisor for your area. And what we do is we tend to work with organisations to help them, be it with training or if it's just advice and guidance on best practice, employment law, or, you know, training. So it can be in that capacity. And then we also assist with workplace disputes. So that can be on an individual level. If an individual has a dispute with the organisation, we are involved in that capacity. And then I'm sure you've all seen the strikes that are ongoing at the moment. So we will also be involved, you know, where there's a collective dispute as well. So we always try and help resolve in that sense, and we're completely impartial. So yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mia. Next slide. So as well as the senior advisors that you have access to, we also have the helpline, which is accessible to anyone, any sector, and they are really knowledgeable on the helpline. I've used them before myself. You know, they are really up to date, can help with a range of topics. And again, you know, that's an anonymous service, so we don't capture the organisation that you're calling from. You know, managers can access it, employees can access it, HR, you know, anyone really can call up and ask a question. So that's a really useful tool to use. We also have the ACAS website, which is a fountain of knowledge. You know, there's all sorts of resources on there. You've got templates, all our leaflets are on there, you know, which are free to download. And we also offer free e-learning as well. So some organisations will use that as part of their personal development. You know, there's a range of management topics on there that can be utilised. Okay, thanks, Mia. Okay. Okay, so we'll look at a written statement now. So as of April 2020, having a written statement is now a day one right. So it used to be that somebody would need to be provided with written terms sort of within 8 weeks of their employment. So it is now a day one right for all employees. So that's important to be aware of. If it's found that that hasn't been provided, an employee can take action, and there is a penalty of up to sort of 4 weeks pay for that. So a written statement, you know, it doesn't have to include everything. It would just need to include the principal terms of employment. And then quite often what you'll see then is that other policies are referred to then, you know, within that set of written terms. So that's the supplementary documents there, so that can be signposted to within that. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mia. Okay, so if you are considering introducing a written statement, if it's something that's not already in place within the organisation, some of the things that are worth considering would be to consult employees. So it's important that, you know, when you are issuing the written terms, that there are no sort of surprises in there. So if it's something that you're introducing after the event, if you like, that you're consulting with employees to agree that. Take advice. So again, you know, you can access your local senior advisor for that. You know, we do visits where we can come in, we can review policies and procedures with you. I can help you, you know, create the documents that are needed. Keep it simple, you know, avoid high-level legal jargon that, you know, employees perhaps are not going to understand, and, you know, quite often organisations don't also understand. So keep it simple and, you know, to the point. And if you are using templates or, you know, using other resources, make sure that it is fit for purpose, you know, for your organisation and reflective of that. And keeps it up to date as well. So making sure that any statements, any written statements are kept up to date. You know, if there are any changes in, you know, customer practice, and, you know, that it is reflected within the written terms also. Okay, thank you. So we'll look briefly at termination of contract. So when we bring the employment to an end, so that can happen various ways, you know, as captured on the slide there. So one of the key things to be mindful of in terms of when the relationship is coming to an end is that, you know, for any dismissal, we need to be mindful, you know, if you are dismissing, that is for a fair reason. So if it's due to capability, then you would need to be mindful of the ACAS code. So that's a code of practice essentially that sets out steps that an employer should meet in terms of bringing that employment relationship. So if it isn't something that you're familiar with, you know, I would strongly recommend that you familiarise yourself with that, because if an employee feels that they've been unfairly dismissed, that is something that an employment judge would look at to see, has the employer followed the ACAS code of practice when dismissing. So again, all that, you know, resource is available on the ACAS website. Okay, next slide. Yeah. Okay, so looking at working hours. So with regards to working hours, there is a limit of an average of 40 hours a week, unless the employee has chosen to opt out that. So, you know, important that that is documented within the organisation. So 11 consecutive hours of rest in any 24-hour period. Entitlement to 1 day off each week. And a limit then on hours for night workers as well. So there is a separate requirement there. So on the next slide, we'll look at young workers and being mindful of that. So if you do have young workers within your workplace, important to make sure that you are familiar with the requirements there. So maximum of 8 hours per day, an entitlement of daily rest of 12 hours, the rest breaks there, and a weekly rest period of 48 hours. Now, there are exceptions to that within some industries, so agriculture, catering, hospitals, and similar. And there is a compensatory rest as well. So if for any reason it wasn't able to be met by the organisation due to an incident or situation, then they are entitled then to that compensatory rest back. Okay, thank you, Mia. Okay, so holidays and holiday pay. So holidays and sickness. So as we know, holidays accrue during periods of sickness. So important that, you know, that is captured and, you know, that we're aware of that. And also that workers and employees are not forced to take holidays rather than sickness. So as we know, holidays are for a period of rest from work, and sick leave then is to recover from the sickness. So that is something to be mindful of, and you know, shouldn't be happening within the organisation. So holidays and overtime. So any compulsory or regularly worked overtime should be included within holiday pay. Any purely voluntary overtime where there isn't that obligation to offer it and no obligation to do the overtime should be included if it's paid over a sufficient period of time on a regular basis. So if that's, you know, regularly worked overtime. Okay. So with regards to pay, I know we have Sakina on today, who is from the HMRC, so she will be your expert in that area. But just to summarise really, with regards to pay within the workplace, all workers must get a written pay statement. Now I know with ACAS, you know, we do deal with a lot of pay queries, you know, that come through, and that can be due to, you know, lack of pay statements or confusion around the pay that's included on that pay document. So really important that that's provided and that it's given on the day of pay or prior to the pay date. Any fixed deductions must be shown. So, you know, any national insurance, anything like that that's deducted should be shown on that written statement, along with any variable hours also should be captured on that written pay statement. Part-time workers must get the same pay rate as full-time workers. So the equivalent should be, you know, the same as, you know, the hourly rate for a full-time worker. And national minimum wage as well. So I'll leave that. I know Sakina's going to talk about that in a lot of detail. So thank you. If you want to. Next one. So we'll touch on having an absence policy and why that is important. So having a clear structured absence policy does give clarity to employees and also managers. You know, one of the most important aspects of managing absence within the workplace is consistency. So really encourage any organisation who doesn't have one to introduce, you know, a structured, detailed absence policy. So it gives that clear direction to the employees and also to managers who are dealing with managing absence. Another thing to sort of highlight is, if you do have an absence policy, to make sure that it is implemented and actually enforced and used within the organisation, that it's not sort of on a shelf gathering dust somewhere, important that is actually being used in practice within the workplace. Also make sure that it is easily accessible to staff, that staff are able to access that absence policy, be it, through digital means, or that it is available, in staff breakout areas, or, it's accessible to them. Making sure that, there are clear trigger points within that absence policy as well, that can help provide, that clarity to employees and managers. And ultimately, it ensures fairness and consistency among the workforce. Okay, just to mention as well, if you did want to introduce or you wanted to review your absence policies, again, that is something ACAS can help you with if needed. Okay. So to touch on here, so what you might expect to see within the absence policy. So really important that employees know how to report their absence, so make it quite clear if it's a call that's expected, or who that should be to, make sure that's clear in there. Any requirements with regards to fit notes, that should be captured in there. The return to work process, that involves a conversation upon the individual's return, and a great opportunity, to check in with the employee at that point as well. Any support available if you offer counselling services or access to employee assistance programs. Great idea to include that within your policies. Keeping in contact, what the expectation might be around keeping in contact during someone's absence, be that short-term or a longer-term absence. If there are trigger points, what they are, set those out clearly. Any further information with regards to pregnancy and disability absences, and then entitlement to sick pay as well, and whether that's contractual or statutory sick pay, include the information with regards to that there. Okay, thank you, Mia. Okay, so with regards to annual leave, this is another area that is worth reviewing within the organisation. So the gov.uk website has a fantastic tool and resource on there, the holiday calculator. So you can input the information on there, and that will help calculate, that can be used by employees and employers also. So as a legal minimum, employees are entitled to 5.6 weeks. With regards to notice, an employee should give at least twice the amount of holiday that they intend to take as notice. So if somebody is wanting a day's holiday, they should be giving at least 1 day's notice for that. A week should be 2 weeks, and so on. Okay, so bank holidays. So there's no legal right to time off for public or bank holidays, and these include bank holidays when the banks are not allowed to trade, and common law holidays, as well as holidays by due to royal celebrations, as we saw quite a lot last year. So that did generate quite a number of queries there. So always good to review your written terms in relation to that entitlement to bank holidays, and just check the wording of what that entails within your written terms. So the holiday year, be mindful of the holiday year ends and what the entitlement is with regards to carrying over, and what your written terms and contracts are allowing for in terms of carrying over. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Mia. Just conscious of time there.
No, diolch yn fawr, Louise. Thank you for
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Again, any questions, you can pop them in the chat. That's absolutely fine. I can see Frank's already answered a question in the chat. So yeah, carry on using the chat. That's fantastic. We have Rhys up next.
Thanks, Mia.
Hi.
Good morning. My name is Rhys Jones. I work as Stakeholder and Project Manager for the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate, known as EAS. I'm going to be talking to you very briefly today about the work that EAS does and highlight some areas of our legislation that may be of interest. EAS are the state regulator of recruitment agencies in England, Scotland and Wales, and sit within the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Our role is to enforce the Employment Agencies Act 1973 and the Associated Conduct Regulations 2003, both as amended. Our work involves investigating complaints made against recruitment agencies that allege a breach of our legislation. Our most common complaint is for non-payment of wages. Under our legislation, it is always the responsibility of the recruitment agency to pay agency workers in temporary roles for all hours worked. We also carry out targeted inspections of recruitment agencies throughout the country to check for compliance. Only agency supply outside of GLAA licensed sectors are regulated by EAS. So agency supply to roles in food production, agriculture, horticulture, and shellfish gathering are out of scope for us, but agency roles in, say, the drive-in or hospitality sectors would fall within our remit. EAS's main aim is to seek compliance with our legislation, but where this fails, EAS has a range of enforcement options available to us. Their purpose is to encourage and sustain compliance with the legislation. We may consider taking further enforcement action, such as criminal prosecution or prohibiting individuals from running a recruitment agency where serious or continued non-compliance is identified. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll quickly cover some areas of EAS legislation that may be of interest to you as training providers and hirers. So the first one then is around fees charged to work seekers for goods or services. So if agencies offer to provide or arrange a service or good that the work seeker will be charged a fee for, then they need to give that seeker a notice of the terms and conditions around the charge. For example, if the work seeker is going to be charged for uniform or a training course provided by either the recruitment agency or third party, then the agency, when making that offer, must give the work seeker a notice that sets out the amount of the fee or how it is calculated, to whom the fee is payable, a description of the good or service that the work seeker will be receiving, and the terms around cancellation or withdrawal and any refunds or rebates. It's also worth noting that it is illegal for the agency to charge the work seeker a fee for work finding services. The next one then for hirers. Agencies may charge transfer fees to hirers where work seekers are taken on directly or through a different agency, but only if their terms of business comply with Regulation 10 of the Conduct Regulations. If an agency is attempting to charge you a fee and you think something is wrong, then you can speak to EAS for advice. Another one for hirers then, agencies have a legal requirement to gather information about an assignment from the hirer before supplying someone to work within the role. This includes the start date, the likely duration of the assignment, and the nature and location of the work, amongst others. Most importantly, they need to ask the hirer about any known health and safety risks and the steps taken to control or mitigate those risks. They're legally required then to pass this information on to the work seeker when they offer them an assignment to work with you. And finally then, for hirers, agencies have a legal requirement to check a work seeker's identity and that they have the experience, training and qualifications required to work within the role. They must send you a written confirmation that they've completed these suitability checks on the work seeker when they propose them to start work within a role. However, it is still your responsibility as the end client to carry out your own right to work check. Thank you for your time. If you have any queries on EAS legislation or the work that we do, please feel free to contact us using the contact details supplied. I'll now hand you back to Mia.
Diolch, Rhys. Thank you very much. Sakina, HMRC.
Good morning, everybody.
Hiya.
Thank you for having me here to speak to you all today. My name is Sakina Oxley. I've been part of the National Minimum Wage team within HMRC for 6 years, and I've worked in various different roles, all the way from enforcement to training, and my current role is part of the promoting compliance team in an educational capacity for workers and employers to help them get things right. I get the next slide, please, Mia. So who are we then as the National Minimum Wage team? So National Minimum Wage policy is actually owned by the Department for Energy and Business Energy and Industrial Strategy, BEIS. And we, as a department within HMRC, we enforce this policy on their behalf. We exclusively deal with national minimum wage issues. We do not cross over into any other areas of tax compliance. So as I said, I'm part of the Promote team, and our main purpose is all about raising awareness on national minimum wage. We recognise that minimum wage issues are very complicated and that mistakes are easy to make. And we really want to help employers prevent these mistakes from happening. And ultimately, our goal is to help workers get what they're owed. So as you can see on the screen, 5 different rates of minimum wage, and the rate that you're entitled to depends on your age and whether or not you're an apprentice. So the highest rate of minimum wage is known as the National Living Wage, and this is applicable to all workers aged 23 and over. So the living wage saw a 6.6% increase back in April 2022. And you may well have seen on the news, it's set to go even higher in 2023. So as of the 1st of April, it goes up by 9.7%, putting money back into the pockets of the lowest paid workers in the country. Can I have your next slide, please, Mia? Excuse me. So how do we investigate? So we either receive intelligence from workers themselves who think they might have been underpaid, or we conduct our enforcement activities based on our own research into industries and areas that might be more at risk of underpaying minimum wage, or we might look at a geographical area that has low complaints and target our information gathering there. We are completely impartial. We don't go in with any preconceived ideas on the truth of what the worker's saying, or we don't go in on the side of the employer. But what we do is we fact find, we speak to employers, we speak to workers, we speak to any other relevant people. And then we look at records to establish if there are any underpayments that have occurred. If there are underpayments that are found, we'll calculate the arrears that are due back to workers, and they will be based on the current rate of minimum wage. So even if the underpayment occurred 5 years ago, for instance, and just to point out that our reviews can go back up to a period of 6 years, we will always calculate arrears based on the current rate of minimum wage to make sure that that worker is compensated for all the time that they haven't been in receipt of what they're entitled to. So where arrears are calculated, what we'll do is we'll then issue a notice of underpayment to the employer in question. And what that is it's essentially just a legal notice requiring the employer to repay money to their worker or workers if more than one are affected. As well as that notice of underpayment and the requirement to pay money back to their workers, there are some further sanctions where the employer is facing a penalty payable to HMRC. Now that penalty is 200% of any underpayment that we find. We're not like other areas of HMRC. There is no wriggle room here. We have no sort of control over reducing that penalty based on an employer's behaviour or their attitude or their cooperation with the compliance check. It's 200%. The only way that can be reduced is if that employer pays all arrears to their workers and half of the penalty to HMRC within 14 days of the date of service of the notice of underpayment. In that case, if they do that, then only 50% of that 200% penalty is payable. They're also subject to public naming, and this is often the biggest deterrent to employers. They'll be named in a press release that's put out by BEIS. It used to happen quarterly, it's a little less frequent now, but those names go out into the public domain, become a matter of public record, stating that those employers have been found to have not paid their workers at least the minimum wage. On issue of a notice of underpayment, the employer does have a right to appeal, and they can do that within, again, 28 days of the issue of the notice of underpayment to an employment tribunal. Okay, next slide, please, Mia. So obviously I talked about the different rates of national minimum wage. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as just paying the correct rate. There's a lot of things that can affect it and impact it. Obviously, rates are important. One of the common mistakes that people is just failing to uplift pay at the right time. So we all know the national minimum wage rate for some time now has been going up on the 1st of April each year. It's great for, you know, the big businesses that have systems in place, have, you know, agents dealing for them and deal with those uplifts at the right time. Smaller businesses sometimes just forget. It might be on their radar, but, you know, life happens and something might get in the way, but it's so important to make sure that those rate increases go up at the right time. That's probably one of the simplest mistakes to fix and to avoid, is just having that awareness. Same goes for key birthdays. So when people move from one band national minimum wage to the next, so those are at 18, 20 and 23. The second big risk is unpaid working time. So this is anything where there is a requirement imposed on that worker by their employer to either be doing something or be somewhere. A lot of time we find risks occurring where there's that requirement, oh, you need to be in 5 minutes before your shift starts so you can get ready, or you can do a handover, or for changing time. If you require your workers to wear PPE, for instance, in food processing, that time spent changing into that PPE is considered to be working time. Traveling time, likewise, is working time. So this is a big issue, you might imagine, in things like the domiciliary care industry, where people travel to see clients. They might go to one client, move on to another, then another, and so on. The only travel time that isn't considered to be working time for minimum wage purposes is what we all face, which is our home to work and our work to home commute. Deductions and payments are a big one for us. That's not to say employers are not allowed to take deductions. In national minimum wage legislation, there's no concept of an illegal deduction, contrary to what employment law might say. What we care about is the impact that these deductions have, or these payments have, on a worker's national minimum wage pay. So for instance, if your workers are required required to wear a uniform, and there's a charge on that, whether you take it as a deduction from their pay or they pay for it externally. So let's say they're required to wear a white shirt and black trousers, and they go and buy that from Primark. Just because of the fact that that is a requirement of their employment, it's a requirement put on them by their employer, that deduction or that payment that they pay to Primark, unless it's reimbursed to them, it will reduce their pay for national minimum wage purposes and may cause underpayments. Another risk for minimum wage is incorrect application of the accommodation offset. So accommodation is the only benefit in kind that's considered for minimum wage purposes. And there's what's known as the accommodation offset rate. Now, this is a daily rate that's applicable where accommodation is freely available to the worker for a 24-hour period. And the accommodation is provided by you, the employer, and it's considered to be living accommodation, i.e. we would consider it to be habitable, safe, secure, etc. So the weekly amount for the accommodation offset is currently standing at £60.90. So if you provide accommodation free of charge to your worker, what we'll do is we'll look at what they're paid, and then we'll add on this notional £60.90 as a benefit in kind, which can artificially, because we're not saying that you actually pay them this £60.90, but it can artificially bump up their national minimum wage pay. If they pay you an amount, but they pay you under that £60.90 limit, we don't do anything. There's no adjustment made to pay. We don't kind of add anything at all on there. If you charge them over this £60.90 amount, the difference between what you charge and that £60.90 will reduce their national minimum wage pay and could potentially cause underpayments. Another big one for us is apprentices, and the main problems occur when people are incorrectly paid the apprenticeship rate when they should actually be paid their age rate. So for us to concede that the apprenticeship rate is due, we would look for certain things like the apprentice being signed up on a government scheme. We would look for them to have a clear plan of what they are learning, a qualification that they're working towards, and we would look that there is a start and end date. And we would look to see that this learning is actually taking place. So another way that people get the apprenticeship rate wrong is, let's say they take on an apprentice in the May, but they don't actually sign up and start their apprenticeship proper until the September. Yet from that period, May to September, they've paid that apprenticeship rate. That's not right. You can only pay the apprentice rate when that worker starts their official apprenticeship. And then finally, employment status. So this is where you might treat someone as self-employed when actually there is an element of control exerted on them where they would become a worker for national minimum wage purposes. So it is possible for someone to be treated as self-employed for tax and national insurance purposes, yet still deemed to be a worker for minimum wage purposes. And as I said, it all boils down to control. For someone to be truly self-employed, we would look to see that they're able to set their own prices, they're able to set their own hours of work, they can refuse work, they can terminate and not provide work when they want, they can send in the substitute if they're not able to provide the work personally, and they stand a risk of personally making a profit or a loss. Next slide, please, Mia. So for a worker or a third party to make a complaint, there are a couple of routes of complaint. There is a Pay and Works Rights online form on gov.uk. where workers can make complaints. All complaints are treated confidentially, so they don't need to give us their name, although I will highlight that it makes the process a lot easier if they do give us their name. We will not reveal to the employer that they have made a complaint to us at all. We will do everything in our power to protect their rights. And workers can also speak to my lovely colleagues at ACAS, as Louise was saying, and this is not just for workers, this is for employers too. As Louise said, you know, they are experts in that field. If you have any questions about the minimum wage, give them a call. And if the issue that you're asking about is complex, they can then pass you on to the National Minimum Wage team who can help you. Okay, next slide, please. So just before I finish up, these are just some of the crazy reasons that employers have used to excuse the fact that they've not paid minimum wage. You know, as you can see there, they weren't a good worker, so they don't deserve it. Apparently it's part of UK culture to not pay workers for the first 3 months. They don't deserve minimum wage. Fact is, you can use whatever excuse you like. There is no valid excuse apart from a very, very tiny list of exceptions as to why you don't pay someone the minimum wage. Likewise, a worker cannot opt out of their right to receive the minimum wage. This is something we do see, but national minimum wage legislation is protective legislation, which means that regardless of what the worker thinks or is willing to accept, they retain their entitlement to minimum wage. Okay, that's me. Thank you very much. And if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. Back
Thank
to
you very much. Thank you very much, Sakina. Diolch yn fawr. Robert.
Hi there, everybody. Bore da.
Diolch yn fawr. Pass
Diolch,
over to you.
Diolch yn fawr. So I'm Robert Jervis Gibbons. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for Wales and in BSI. And my role is to raise awareness of standards as an alternative to regulation or legislation. And also getting Welsh voices into BSI as well. So for example, everybody on this call could contribute to a BSI committee because obviously you've got an enormous amount of expertise in various areas. So today I'm going to talk about BS 25700, which is the organizational responses to modern slavery. So we have recently published a modern slavery standard, and there it is. If you could just go on to the next slide, Mia, please. So just start about what is BSI? Well, and why is it important to you? So BSI is the national standards body for the UK. And as I said, BSI creates standards. They are voluntary and they're used to make things better in life, basically. And they're just an agreed way to do something. So for example, in everyday life, if you were to get on a train from Cardiff Central to London Paddington, you wouldn't have to change trains because the rail tracks are the same size. That is a perfect example of standardization. So back in the 1800s, the rail lines in this country were not standardized. So you would have to have changed trains. Another example would be if you were blending something in your kitchen tonight to make a recipe, and your blender has a cutoff switch, so you can't put your finger in it, so it doesn't cut off your finger. So there's another example of standardization. So standards are made by a committee of experts in BSI who are volunteers drawn from industry, academia, the public, and the government. So as I said, everybody on this call, including myself, could be a member of a BSI committee if you wanted to be. And if you do want to be a member on anything which is of interest with BSI is doing, just let me know. On the next slide, so I'll just talk a bit more about BS 25700, which is the organizational responses to modern slavery. So this is a pioneering British standard giving organizations in Wales and businesses guidance on how to manage modern slavery risks in their operations, supply chains, and wider operating environment. It's a useful tool to encourage organizations to look at prevention, identification, response, remediation, mitigation, and reporting. And it offers a comprehensive approach to addressing modern slavery that puts people at the heart of the organization. The standard helps demonstrate organizational commitment to ESG, which helps build confidence in an organization's governance and ethics. So as I said earlier, before I joined BSI, I always thought of BSI as an organization which deals in standards to do with safety, for example. So I talked about product safety just now. I've got a background in product safety, but when I joined BSI, I didn't actually realize the extent that BSI does standards on absolutely everything to do with living. And this is a good example where modern slavery, we're trying to build confidence within organizations so they have a response to modern slavery risks. So just on the next slide. So as a result of this work, BSI often charges for standards, and that's where we get our income. So we publish standards, and obviously there's a charge for them. So we have been pleased to make this BS 25700 free to download globally, so everybody on this call or your colleagues or any organizations in Wales and beyond will be able to download this standard for free. And we encourage everyone to share the link, which is there. And I think it'll be available in the chat as well, to share the link with a network and the standard downloaded and used widely. So that's basically BS 25700 in a nutshell. And I'll just on the next slide. As I said earlier, that anything to do with standards for Welsh stakeholders, I'm here to help you. It's a resource that BSI put in with a commitment to devolve government in Wales. I can see the link has just gone into the chat. Thank you, Josh. And if you need more information on this standard or anything that BSI does, interested in getting involved in BSI and our committees as well, please do not hesitate to contact me. So thanks very much. I kept it nice and sweet and short there. Diolch yn fawr, Mia.
Diolch, Robert. Yeah, Joshua sent the link in the chat. So yeah, everyone can access that from there. Final speaker for today then is Joshua from Welsh Government. I'll pass over to you, Joshua.
Thank you very much, Mia. I'll try and keep my contribution fairly short and sweet as well. So yeah, I'd like to take the opportunity to talk to you about the Welsh Government's Code of Practice on Ethical Employment and Supply Chains. So the Welsh Government encourages organisations that operate in Wales to sign up to this Code of Practice, including organisations of all sizes and all sectors. And we particularly expect all public service sector organisations, businesses and third sector organisations in receipt of public funding in Wales to sign up to the Code of Practice. We have signatories in the food and drink sector to the code, and we also have public bodies, third sector organisations and businesses from sectors as diverse as construction, healthcare, cleaning services, and TV and film production also. If I can move on to the next slide, please. Oh, actually, sorry, if I stay back on the original slide, if I go back, actually. Yep, so I'd like to just sort of outline first what the code is. So the code essentially comprises 12 commitments addressing unethical and unlawful practices, including labour exploitation, blacklisting, full self-employment, and unfair use of 0 hours contracts. If your organisation has signed up to the code, it means that it has agreed to adhere to these 12 commitments. I'll put the main code document also in the chat here, but in addition to the main code document itself, the Welsh Government has produced guidance on implementing the code, which goes into quite a lot of detail about how different organisations can implement the commitments to tackle risks of unlawful and unethical practices in your organisations and in domestic and international supply chains. We also have online training, which is available on the code as well. And if I now move on to the next slide, please, thank you. So at the moment, we have around 470 organizations signed up to the code. We're doing work at the moment to review and update the code, and also looking at developing a new governance group, which will advise on the future direction of the code as we go forwards. And we want to make it as accessible as possible to people and businesses really across Wales. So we're doing some work on what that looks like and how we go forwards with that. Also looking at how the code intersects with the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Bill, which is legislation currently progressing through the Senate, and we're looking at how we could look at potentially some of the code commitments aligning with the guidance that we intend that will be published following the bill becoming law if the Senate decides to pass that legislation. So that's something we're exploring as well at the moment, given there's quite strong links between what that legislation is seeking to do in terms of promoting fair work and seeking to make sure that public procurement is done in socially responsible ways with the intentions of the code, which are quite similar. And we're also doing work around additional communications, looking at how we can kind of evaluate the impact of a code and how we can best share knowledge as well with code signatories. So that work is ongoing as well. But yeah, that's it really from me on the code of practice, and I'd like to express my big thanks to everyone who's taken the time to be here today, and a big thanks to Mia, and I'll pass back to her and for questions and answers.
Oh, thank you, Joshua, and you've done the thank yous on my behalf as well there. Yes, I want to thank all the organisations for taking part over the past 3 weeks. Like I said, we will be pulling together a fact sheet, so will that be able to be sent out to businesses that have joined and training providers, and also businesses and training providers who haven't been able to join, as well as a recording of these workshops. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? You know, I know there's been a question in the chats and that's been answered, so fantastic. Thanks, Frank, for answering that, and Joshua, thank you for sending a few links. If there aren't any questions, that's absolutely fine. If there's questions, you know, that you think of after this workshop, once you've spoken to colleagues or something, by all means, happy for you to send them over to me, and I will pass the questions on to the relevant organisation and get back to you with the answers. So I don't think there's any questions. So if that's the case, happy to finish the workshop here. And yeah, thank you again, everyone, for taking your time for joining these workshops. And I'm sure they've been very beneficial to all of us who've listened in. So diolch yn fawr. Thank you, everyone.